From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm John Cole. I'm the director of the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, a small office that believes in promoting books and reading and literacy in libraries. And one of our ways that we best do this kind of promotion, at least here at the Library of Congress, is through sponsoring programs such as tonight's program. Each of the talks in our Books and Beyond series features new books that somehow relate to the collections or the programs of the Library of Congress. We at the Library of Congress have a special interest in making these books and these authors and these topics well known. So we are pleased that the program is planned and underway tonight for a book that has already come out, and I want to hold up a copy of this marvelous book and to also tell you that we do have books for sale tonight, and when we complete the program there'll be a chance for you to buy the book and for a book signing. To introduce our speakers tonight, I have the privilege of introducing the co-sponsor of tonight's program, the Library of Congress's publishing office. One of the great advantages of being at the Library of Congress and being an office such as the Center for the Book is that we can find co-sponsors, as you can imagine, from the whole panoply of Library of Congress collections and specialists, and we're not limited in any way to a particular field or even to a particular language. But more often than not, when a book is published in association with the Library of Congress, we're pleased to have the publishing office as our co-sponsor. Ralph Eubanks is the director and has been the director of the library's publishing office since 1995. In addition to being a wonderful publisher and a creator of partnerships in publishing, Ralph himself is an author, and we had the privilege not so long ago of actually having a Books and Beyond talk when Ralph was the featured speaker. And this is for his new book called Ever is a Long Time, A Journey into Mississippi's Dark Past, excuse me. And we're pleased that Ralph is on his way as an author. He's back from the author tour in time, however, to make tonight's introductions. Please welcome Ralph Eubanks.
Thank you very much, John. In 1998, the Library of Congress had an exhibit called the African American Odyssey, and I was involved in developing the exhibition catalog for that exhibit. And one of the things I saw in that exhibit were these photographs of black businesses and very elegantly dressed African American people. And I was completely taken by these photographs because there was an image of late 19th century African American life that I had never seen before. And I thought that others had not seen it either. So I thought that we would eventually do a book on these, but lots of things came up in the meantime, lots of different projects. There was a Library of Congress bicentennial, which required us to put out about 6 books in 1 year, so that took up quite a bit of time. And once that was over, these photographs kept coming back to me. The images kept coming back in my head. And in one of our editorial meetings in the publishing office, we started talking about various projects. And the topic came up of, well, what about doing something with the Du Bois photographs? I thought, great idea, let's do it. So I'm pleased that we're finally here tonight talking about our book, A Small Nation of People, which has been in the making for quite some time now. And I have to say, before I introduce our honored guest tonight, that there are several people in the audience tonight on the library staff that I'd like to acknowledge. First, I'd like to acknowledge Marisha Battle from the Prints and Photographs Division, who is at the back with the album that has just come out of conservation, that is here, that you can view after the program tonight. And also Carol Johnson from the Interpretive Programs Office, who was involved in selecting some of the photographs that were part of the African American Odyssey exhibit that really drew me into thinking about a book of these photographs. And of course, a book never happens without an editor involved. And the editor was Linda Barrett Osborne, who is sitting in the front right here, and worked very diligently to make all this happen. And before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to give her a big round of applause. Our speakers tonight to talk about A Small Nation of People are David Levering Lewis and Deborah Willis. David Levering Lewis, a MacArthur Fellow, is the Julius Silver Chair in History in the History Department at New York University. His most recent book, W.E.B. Du Bois, The Fight for Equality and the American Century, won the 2001 Pulitzer Prize and was a finalist for the National Book Award. Also garnering the Pulitzer, Parkman, and Bancroft Prizes in 1994 was W.E.B. Du Bois' Biography of a Race, which was also a finalist for the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Deborah Willis, who's the second speaker tonight, is also a MacArthur Fellow. She is the professor of photography and imaging at New York University and writes frequently on blacks and the history of photography. Among her latest books are Reflections in Black, A History of Black Photographers, 1840 to the Present, and The Black Female Body, A Photographic History. I'd like to first start out with Dr. Lewis, who will go first, and then with Deborah Willis. So please welcome David Levering Lewis.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in this space, especially for this occasion, because as Ralph Eubanks says, this is an idea whose time took a long time coming to be reified. The collection of photographs that W.E.B. Du Bois largely assembled in 1899 to present at the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1900. I had myself, when I wrote the first volume of my Du Bois biography, never seen these photographs. I had some sense of what they would be like. I think I had seen a copy of the Colored American, which celebrated the success of Du Bois in Paris. After all, he was awarded a gold medal for his contribution to the Negro section housed in the pavilion of social economy on the Rue des Nations there. But I was just blown away when Linda Osborne sent me rather smudgy photocopies, as in the nature of things they had to be. But even though they were Xeroxes, I realized what a splendid evocation of a time and of a race and of a place they must be. And of course, the book, so beautifully produced, corroborates that impression, as did my seeing tonight, fresh out of conservation, some of the photographs that Miss Battle is going to allow some of you to see later. What about this exposition? Well, of course, there are 160 photographs, and the cliche that a picture is worth 1,000 words does mean that with 160 I can really be quite brief, and so I shall be, because my NYU colleague Debbie is going to give us a wonderful slideshow, and she knows about these photos in a technical and historical way far better than I. As a historian, what's to be said? Well, it's really that two races went to Paris in 1900. In 1889, the United States had been represented at a World's Fair in Paris, and we had come a cropper. We had not shown the flag well. Our exhibits apparently were mediocre. The arrangements were deplorable. It was a national embarrassment. And so in 1898 and 9, when Congress addressed the business of the budget for the United States participation this time, there was great nervousness and determination that the United States would show itself well. So that's one part of the story. But for people of color, there was the same objective, the same urgency. We had not been well represented at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the famous White City show of 1893. There were all sorts of demeaning images that survived that show. And so when Thomas Calloway presented to the appropriate congressional body the proposal that there be a modest funding for a Negro presence at the fair, and when that indeed was was voted, he reached out to a key number of people who could bring this about, and of course Du Bois he reached for first, and the effort was to present the African American as a full, accomplished, assimilating American. Just a few years later, of course, in 1903, the Souls of Black Folk would appear. And memorably, it would say that the African American, the Negro, suffered from a divided consciousness, two souls in one dark, warring body. But there was none of this in 1899. And so what is so significant about this document is that it was, in a sense, the last hoorah of people of color before they were compelled to adjust themselves to the new racism, the white supremacy that was being concocted from 1900 on. Well, it had begun sooner. And so these ladies and gentlemen, that lady and the gentleman, look upon themselves as full participants of this republic, given just a slight chance to do so. And in their particular and specific accomplishments as lawyers, doctors, preachers, bankers, industrialists, they were as representative a group of people as you could find anywhere. And so for a moment, it's thought that this exemplary presence and presentation photographically might indeed become true itself. That the attention that the Negro section would garner abroad would bleed back to the United States and influence and mediate and soften what was soon to be called by W.E.B. Du Bois's one of his best mentees, Rayford Logan, the nadir. But at this point, the nadir has not come. Well, the show, however, or the presentation, was not only photographs. It also consisted of the most specific documents to do with demography, with employment, with the migration of people. It was true sociology, as you would expect from a man who had just written one of the most path-setting books of sociology, The Philadelphia Negro, but a year before, or 2 years before. The date slipped now. And so all of that was taken off to the social science pavilion, and it made an enormous impression upon the French. The response of the American media, as you see, as you read, there was no response. There was a total muteness. And it's most peculiar because, thanks to Linda Osborne, I think I read everything written about the exposition. And what became the Herald Tribune managed to notice the most insignificant, the most bizarre aspects and facets of this ongoing Universal Exposition, but not a word about the effort of the Negro section. Not until almost the very end, when, after Du Bois had received his gold medal, the people of color took over the United States Pavilion for one night, a grand gala party. Everyone tuxed up, ladies and gentlemen, to the nth degree. And it seems to have been a wonderful party. The champagne flowed, and it was an interracial affair. And then the New York Herald Tribune noted that it had been quite an unusual occasion, that large numbers of dark-skinned people tuxed up had a party in the Negro Pavilion, and wasn't that curious. However, there was public money involved in the Negro Pavilion. Congress had allocated a small sum, and so naturally there had to be a record of it somewhere. And so when the commissioner for the United States delegation had his report redacted, quite surprisingly, it was a fair document, and it acknowledged how unusually detailed, how sociologically apt, how deftly the whole ensemble was as a representation of the best in the United States. But of course nobody read that. It was shelved in the Library of Congress, and it disappeared, as did the photographs. When they were returned here, I believe, if memory serves me right, there was one display of them in Cincinnati, and I'm not quite clear at this moment what the occasion was. But then they went to the bowels of the library, where they remained until recent time. I might just add that one other marker of the Universal Exposition was that Du Bois, when it closed, crossed the Channel and went to Great Britain, and there presided over the Pan-African Conference. And that, therefore, launched, in collaboration with a number of distinguished ladies and gentlemen of Anglophone African ancestry, a movement that was decades later to achieve some fruition in the decolonization of Africa. And so 1900 was a banner year for things happening, good and bad. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful introduction to what I'm going to share. But I'd like to thank a number of people here tonight, specifically Marisha Battle, because of her work and allowing us to look at the original photographs. And during the research, it was really helpful for me, because as an undergraduate student in the 70s, I knew about the exposition, but did not know the photographs survived. So it was really an important moment to find that the photographs were here, and I really want to thank whoever picked them up and decided that the photographs needed to be processed, and I'd like to thank that person. I don't know who, but also, and as David mentioned, Linda sent us piles of photocopies and microfilm texts to read letters and also read newspapers. And I'd like to thank Dr. Sharon Harley, because I spent time at her house in Martha's Vineyard just reading texts. And it was this unrolling, unraveling, and it was really an important moment for me to actually spend time without listening to other people and having that moment of privacy. And so I'd like to say thank you. And specifically to the staff here, it was really helpful for me, for the entire staff in the P&P department, to help me make a selection and work with the photographs. But I'd like to just also kind of introduce some of the photographs and thank the photographers, because as I was going through the photographs, I had an opportunity to identify one of the photographers, and that was a really important moment for me. And just to know that there was a photographer that I had researched in another project, and then to find out that he was the photographer that Du Bois also hired, to make the photographs as well as to collect images. So this is a photograph of one of the images from the collection. When Du Bois was hired, or when he left to attend the exhibition, to actually install the exhibition, he was there he only had 5 months to organize it. So he had photographs that were previously photographed by a number of other photographers, but I know one, Thomas Askew. But also that the selection was really important, and I think that Du Bois was really interested in telling a different story, the whole notion of the progress of the Negro race, what happened to black people after slavery, what their dreams and aspirations, how they imagined themselves. Through photographic images, we see this young woman here who was wearing drop earrings. Just imagine looking at fashion at that time, looking at style, and how important it was for a young woman of the new century, as a new woman, identifying herself as a new woman outside of the domestic home. And at the same time, in terms of 1889, the exposition that David mentioned earlier, this is a photograph of some of the human displays that were on display during that time, 10 years prior to that, to 1900. So this is a photograph that's in Paris. These are men and women, children, as well as the European man who actually posed with them in full clothing. This is a photograph that was actually made in the winter. So as we begin to think about the experiences of human displays and how they were photographed and how they were imagined by, quote, anthropologists and others, these are the stories that the only black people they knew were photographs of these type of images of human displays. So this is one of the photographs from that experience. But then as I began to research the photographs and the history of the moment, I had an opportunity to look through the Booker T. Washington papers. And so this is a moment where Booker T. Washington's papers also had photographic images that talked about the old and the new Negro. And it was really an important moment for me, because I found a photograph. It could be his writing, it could be someone else's, but the fact that he has old and new at Utica, Mississippi in October 1900 says a lot about how they imagine the new Negro, wearing a suit, hat, carrying a briefcase, and also the older man, wrinkled clothes, and changing the moment of how they imagine the black man. And these are some of the photographs from the exposition, imagining visiting the site. And this is where the photographic exhibition was on display. And then this is an important photograph for me as a photographic historian, because this image of Du Bois was made by Paul Nadar. Nadar was one of the most famous photographers with his father in Paris at the time. And for me to find that Du Bois would find an image, would find a photographer like Nadar to photograph his ID card was really important for me. And I was a graduate student a couple of years ago, and I had an opportunity to work this through with one of my thesis advisors who's here tonight, Zofia, and we talked about moments like this in terms of how the cultural moment, the political moment, as well as the historical moment within Du Bois's experience in Paris. And this is the installation shot of the exposition. In terms of time, this is the installation. They had books, maps, charts, but also the photographs that were on wing frames that the visitors could actually turn the frames, as you'll see in the back, and look at the photographs, and just kind of imagining that moment of studying the photographs and looking at the photographs. And this a photograph of Du Bois in Paris. And these are some of the images that were on display. Daniel Murray from Library of Congress, who was instrumental with this. And this is the photograph of Thomas Askew, who is it's a self-portrait. This is a photographer who made a number of the photographs that are on display, as well as on the within the book. And here again, as we read a face, Atlanta, Georgia, an important person within his community, a religious person, a man who had eight or nine children. And here he is wearing, a Van Dyke beard. He's, bow tie. And it's a very self-conscious image in terms of how he sees himself. The photographs were made of young men from Morris Brown, from Atlanta University, from some of the universities in that area. And these are some of the posed images. And one of the other research questions that I was able to answer was this photograph that Thomas Askew made, where he had a home studio, and most of his photographs that were in his home studio he used a lace curtain, and so that was his signature image. And so as I began to look at photographs in Atlanta and look at the Atlanta History Center and Auburn Avenue Research Center, I actually found photographs of other people that he made at the same time with this lace curtain. So I was able to identify that Askew was the photographer. And here we see young women posed in kind of the shirts of the time, also street scenes, and then ball players, and then this image here. And so what I wanted to kind of show was just the range of images that were important for Du Bois to think about when selecting the progress of the Negro race. This is another figure that was important at the time for me to identify as Henry Hugh Proctor. He was the minister in Atlanta. He was also a editor for the Voice of the Negro, and he used this photograph for over 15 years of his life. And so to imagine that he selected an image that was used in the exposition, but also felt that this image depicted his personality, his sense of self, and this image here was really important for him. So it's kind of important for me to look at that and see the story that he's telling about his own life. And these images here also, they're fun, just to see a young girl smiling. And these, in terms of men who were students at the time. And then also home images, women, young girls who are learning music and the arts. And jewelry, I think that's really important to see, because when we began to look at older photographs of black subjects during the period, and outside of your own family images, we rarely found images of women who were embodied beauty, the notion of beauty, how beauty was defined within the black home. Here she's wearing jewelry here, her hair is styled. We also see a student, a nursing student, reading a book, a family photograph on the center, on the table, flowers, and it's a constructed image, but it's constructed to tell a story about a woman who's dreaming about her future and reliving that experience, but also seeing herself as a desired woman. This is the same portrait, the same subject, but seeing herself as a desired woman, sexualized with a fur collar, with a cross, and kind of looking in a dreamlike fashion. Hats, styles, and the fact that Askew's wife was a dressmaker and a designer, I think it's really important. And so here again we see possibly this is her work, and the stories that are developed from there. Women wearing these dress of the period, which were called for which would allow women to run and also bicycle and have other experiences that were outside of domestic work. And this is one of Askew's sons and daughter. And here is an image where the young woman, the young girl, is actually looking at artwork that he posed her with art to imagine that she is part of that story, of looking at the history of art, world art, and how she can imagine herself within that history. And this is Askew's son, except for the sons, except for the guy in the center who was a neighbor. But that's entitled the Summit Avenue Ensemble. So again, his studio on Summit Avenue, but none of the photographs were identified in the exposition. And I think that he used these images as markers, as emblems of the black race, that these are people who he imagined. You don't need to know their names, but these are the people who we see as our future. This is also Askew's daughter, as she's seated dreaming about the image here. It's a landscape. So we can imagine what he is thinking about placing her within the frame of looking at her future, possibly traveling. And these are early photographs he made in the 1880s of his sons, and a playful moment. And this is also part of that experience, part of the exposition. So I'm just going to go through some of the images and for you to appreciate the curatorial eye that Du Bois was able to imagine by using these subjects as symbols. And the experience of the Surrey driver outside of a home, and thinks that the experience of the church, how central that moment is. And here we have, it's probably a funeral because a woman in mourning dress, but the photographer Askew is there, as well as Henry Hugh Proctor, who was the minister of the First Congregational Church in Atlanta. And I think that the aspects of photographic history, in terms of seeing the driver of the buggy is a young woman, and two women on the upper porch outside of the store as if they're about to shop, or some moment that's a community moment. And very rarely, that's why I think these images are important, because they're rare in terms of talking about the community, the history of the working community. Family on a porch. And then finally, this last image. Seems like this is pretty stuck. And this final image, I think, is another one that's central to the story that Du Bois wanted to tell. Here we see a woman wearing glasses, spectacles. Why? Is she a reader? Does she sew in terms of fine print, in terms of craft, in terms of her craft? And so this is a woman who's also concerned about her health. It tells a different story as we begin to read the photograph outside of the stereotype that she's wearing a bandana or a scarf. This is a woman who is concerned about her eyesight and also concerned about her future. So there are different stories as we began to look at this book, and it's a wonderful read in terms of the history. I'm a big fan of David Lewis, and just in terms of how he tells the story about Du Bois and that experience. And I'd like to thank you all for coming and share the moment. Okay?
Thank you very much, Deb and David. I think now we'll open it up for questions, and both our guests will come up and we'll take some questions and answers. And I would ask you both to repeat the question so that everyone in the audience could hear them. Please.
Yes. Is Marisha here? There is a question about the condition of the photographs. Can you come up? Thank you. She's central to this story.
Okay, to answer your question about whether or not, what kind of condition they were in, the way that we found them on the shelf, or the way that I first interacted with them on the shelf, they were 3 albums the covers had been sort of torn off because of use, and the pages that they were on were that horrible corrugated board. But the photographs themselves were in excellent shape, which means that the photographer had taken the time. He was really interested in his craft, and that actually came through. And there's a sample that we have in the back that you can take a look at and just see for yourself that, you know how sometimes you look at old photographs and they're sort of blurred, they're sort of starting to fade, they have foxing marks all over them? That didn't happen here. It was like this little piece of history wanted to survive, and it did. And so we're very grateful.
Don't go far. There may be any other conservation questions? Yes? In the back?
Mine is vigilance, and it was emphasizing the curatorial nature of the vision. It's like it's bringing up for me a whole number of photographs that we have in our family that came from this generation, and the vision, although there aren't community photographs, the vision is very much the same vision in terms of who people are, how they choose to represent themselves. The dress, I haven't looked carefully through it, but my sense that Du Bois is very much a person of his generation and time, so that the vision that he's projecting is not that different from the vision of other educated middle class black folks. And for Deborah, this reminded me, I'm Chris Brown's mother.
Chris Brown's mother.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. This is very much a view that is through the lens of class, and it is bourgeois. There are several that, because Du Bois had a sociological eye, and he would have known that posterity would have reproached him if he hadn't given some indication of an awareness of the grittier side of life. And so there are some cabins that are pretty tatterdemalion, and there are some scenes that you know that these people, life has treated them harshly. But you're quite right to say that the ensemble is triumphalist and middle class, and really quite aesthetically, from the point of view of the mainstream aesthetics, appropriate. These people looked like everybody else who's middle class. But of course, so that means that as a document, it is class-bound, and so then it has the insufficiencies of that. But it makes it all the more valuable because, as we're saying, this is a moment in time when it is thought that it is possible for democracy to work racially.
Could you say more about how Du Bois acquired the photographs, where he got them?
I think you're...
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, but I know because he was teaching at Atlanta University at the time that he hired the local photographers. So that's love to find more about it. And we've spent a lot of time reading letters, people from families at the Atlanta History Center, but we're not sure at this point.
Used as students as well, though.
Yeah, he uses
Yes.
students also, right.
So,
On the continuum of the black photographers, at this point, what, 50 years in?
This is
Second generation photographer askew?
this is a second generation photographer, yes. And unfortunately, he had a fire in his studio in 1911, and he lost all of his negatives and most of his photographs. And his family, whatever was left in terms of the number of photographs, they were able to preserve some of the photographs, but that was the unfortunate aspect of it. There's a lady in the back, and then you, and then Sharon.
My question has to do with Askew's writing techniques. I noticed that in almost all of his portraits, he tends to light the face in a bifurcated way. And I wondered if you
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm not sure because they're all different. Because there are some portraits that he has profiled images, and I think that he was really interested in just exploring the whole notion of portrait photography, and I'm not sure that he had a distinctive style with lighting, but I know that, because they're all different when I look at his photographs, but I know that his photographs that he has of the home studio, the drapery, the lace drapery is significant part. It's a significant part of it.
I'm noticing, at least in these photographs, that the face is usually, one part lit quite significantly more than the other part.
I think these are just a selection that I made, so I don't think it's that. Okay. Yes, sir.
The photograph just before the two women and the signature curtain, wasn't that Paul Lawrence Dunbar?
No, that was just one of his students, right? Mm-hmm.
Remarkable resemblance.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Dick, I wondered how the black press responded to the exhibit.
Yes, I omitted that. I talked about the Herald Tribune, didn't I? The Colored American followed it assiduously and in a boosterist way, and indeed that was true of the press in general, the black press, and there were about 6, I think, newspapers that covered this on a continuum. The Colored American was quite impressive, though. They had a man on the scene, or a woman on the scene, I forget now, and so they wrote reams. And that is an interesting document because the standard of journalism is so high in these newspapers. When you think today of the standard of journalism, there's been some slippage, irrespective of race, but they wrote well and perceptively. Of course, this was part of a time when a kind of ornateness of language was just in the air. Yes, so I suppose that goes to the point that this is our moment, and we're going to cheer the home team, and so they did. There was very little carping. Sometimes you might find nobody said, "Well, Du Bois has gone off and monopolized the whole thing." This will come later when Du Bois is involved in a titanic struggle with Booker T. Washington, and then things become quite personalized. But there's just a generosity across the board, and these unsung people, the librarian here, or the assistant librarian here, and Thomas Calloway, and the businessmen who ponied up to defray expenses. All of it, it's just a good story,
What was Du Bois's experience of Paris? Did he find that he was greeted warmly and genuinely, and did he find that he was treated differently than in the United States? If it's a naive question, I apologize.
Not at all, not at all. He thought that he was quite at home in Paris. He hadn't spent as much time there as he had elsewhere, because when he was pursuing his studies at the University of Berlin, his travels did not take him to France, everywhere else but France, curiously. But when he left the University of Berlin and took a leisurely return to the United States, he spent time in Paris, right in the middle of the Dreyfus case. It had just broken. But he's not aware, in fact the French aren't aware, that the Dreyfus case is going to be a case, but that's the moment when he's there, and that visit has had an impact on my life. I'm going on a bit, but I'll get to the point. He bought the Winged Victory of Samothrace, a maquette of it, and he kept it with him for the rest of his life. It's about that high from the Louvre. And when he expatriated, joined the Communist Party and left and thumbed his nose at his country, he left that in the keeping of a gentleman who was enormously helpful to me in my researches. And he's an elderly man, and when he sold his Park Avenue apartment, he said, "David, I'm sure Du Bois would want you to have the Winged Victory of Samothrace." And my wife said, "For God's sake, well, what can we do with this gift?" And so it now is in special collections at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We restored it before we sent it on. So that gives you a sense of Du Bois is very much a European gentleman. So he expected to be, and he was quite well received in 1900.
And I could say that also with the two photographs that are part of his trip was really central in terms of style and dress for him. Just the top hat outside of possibly his apartment or the studio, the photographer's studio.
But he didn't speak French well at all. German perfectly, but he didn't speak French well.
Are we going to see maybe a book later that involves maybe social realist photography at this time? I mean, we're seeing how, some of these are very posed pictures. What can you speak to maybe Black photographers who are maybe documenting world existence during this period before the New Negro Renaissance?
I'm doing my own photography at this point, so I'm hoping that there are younger scholars out here to explore the new terrain, and that's a great idea, but it's there, and I think the research it should be done, and I'm encouraging it. There's Jane Lusaka in the audience there. There are others, but I think it's a wonderful concept. But I'd really, at this point, I'd really like to work on my photography. And my photography is based on this experience, this research that I have been working on for the past 30 years. And it's the whole notion of how beauty is embodied within African American communities, how the story is told. The story is overlooked because Du Bois, when he was the editor at the Crisis, he was really concerned about Crisis covers and who was placed on the cover. There were beautiful women, there were older men, very handsome men. There were stories that he wanted to tell about the Black race that was outside of the stereotype, and that's something that I'd like to explore with my own photographic experiences. Yes.
I'm not sure if either of you will be able to answer this question, but I'm just wondering about if there's any sort of sense of the ways in which members of the African diaspora and other New World nations are represented at the Paris Exposition. Is that something that comes across from any of the other countries or even the British colonial possessions that are represented at the exposition?
Well, what I could find from this exposition was that the same human displays were on photographic. The only other photographic display was the Hampton album by Francis Benjamin Johnston, and that was the only other photographic of Black Americans. But the other expositions had human displays, and there's tension between that visual experience and the photographic experience there.
I think there was, in fact, a village, wasn't there? And it was very National Geographic-y, I think.
Well, thank you. Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the environment in which the exhibition, about the ability in which
The environment of the installation.
Yes, well, it's in the pavilion of social economy on the Rue des Nations. It was a fairly good-sized structure, and I believe the Negro section took about maybe a third or fourth of the space. That's my sense of things. What else?
There was a statue of Frederick Douglass
yes.
that greeted people, outstretched arms, as they entered the space. That's about it from the installation photographs and the descriptions within the Colored American.
And also some scampering because Du Bois arrived a bit late. And by the time he had uncrated many of his exhibits, the judges had made their first or second pass. And so it wasn't until the third pass that they could acknowledge what he'd done. But he must have, come charging in, top hat and all, with 2 or 3 trunks and put all this together, which of course indicates just, as you said, it took 5 months. He only had 5 months to put this together. And it's just really a tour de force that he got there at all. Yeah.
Any idea who designed the physical exhibit? Because the hinge photograph.
I think that was Callaway's idea.
It was Callaway's idea,
Yes, I think it was his idea. I don't know who did the carpentry.
Right.
They probably just got a good Frenchman to do that.
Last question is, what is the library doing with the photographs now? How are they accessible? Because you said they were 50,000.
Do you want to answer that?
The photographs are all online right now. Just mention that all the photographs are online at our website. I believe they're actually under the Daniel A.P. Murray collection, are they not, Linda? Or
Well, you go to www.loc.gov, click search the catalogs, then you'll get something on the right-hand side of the next screen that says Prints and Photographs catalog. And you click on that. Yeah, I had to memorize this. I was there a lot. You click on that and pick one of the special collections. There are about 60 special collections. It's collection number 2, and it's under African American. So that's what
African American photographs,
you
yes.
can bring them all up. We have about 160 in the book, but there are over 500, and they're all online. You can also come to Prints and Photographs. Any of you could come. Most of the albums are in conservation, but you could come and look at the one that's here, and some of the photographs that weren't in the albums. You can actually come put white gloves on and look at the originals, and you can order copies of our photo collection. So I'm really glad somebody asked that. It's so exciting. You just go click 4 times.
Thank you. Stay right here for a second. I would like to thank the audience and our speakers, but also add a word about Daniel Murray. Linda's mentioned that you go to the Murray collection. Daniel Murray was the assistant librarian that David mentioned. He was the assistant librarian when the Library of Congress was in the Capitol, and he became assistant in 1871, and then was employed to work on this exhibit in Paris, and along the way became a wonderful bibliographer of African American life, and in fact did a book exhibit at the Paris Exposition. But that's where he met Du Bois, and that's how he became connected with the overall exhibit. And when the exhibit was over, Murray got those photographs as part, and became part of his collection, which he bequeathed to the Library of Congress in 1925. But for an African American at that time to be at such high position in the Library of Congress, and obviously to be able to have enough clout to not only take on this wonderful job, but somehow to also get the photographs and add them to the collections was really a wonderful feat for the time. Secondly, we are going to have a book signing, and there's a little rule we have to follow. We've done this before. We have a wonderful crowd tonight, but you're also a large crowd, and many of you haven't had a chance to buy the books yet. So when we conclude, I'd appreciate it if I could go with David and Deborah by myself ahead of the crowd out to the back, and we'll get them settled in the area in the foyer where we will, people can line up to buy the books and then line up to get the signatures. And so if you would let us go before the rest of you, it'll make it a more efficient evening. And finally, this poster over here talks about Telling America's Stories, which is the Library of Congress reading promotion theme for these 3 years. And I would like to conclude by thanking everyone who worked on this project, and especially our speakers tonight for helping us tell a very special American story. Let's give them another hand. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Good. So can you come out with me? Follow me out this way.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.